He collapsed alone in the park and woke up to find two little girls had saved his life. The morning had started like any other for Michael Rivers, though he had no idea it would end with his life hanging by a thread. As one of the wealthiest men in the country and the CEO of a major construction empire, Michael was used to moving through life with purpose and precision. His time was scheduled down to the minute, and every step he took usually had a reason behind it. But that day, for the first time in months, he dismissed his driver and chose to walk through the park on his way to the office. He told himself it was for fresh air, maybe a quiet moment before a chaotic board meeting, but deep down he was simply tired of steel walls, of tinted windows, of the distance between himself and the world. Dressed in a tailored blue suit, his shoes perfectly polished, Michael looked like a man in complete control. His dark brown hair was neatly styled, and his sharp blue eyes scanned the path ahead through a pair of sleek sunglasses. Birds chirped in the background, joggers passed by with headphones in, and the scent of blooming flowers filled the early summer air. The park was calm, ordinary, peaceful. But inside Michael, something was off. He couldn't place it at first, just a slight pressure in his chest, a subtle tightening in his breath, but he ignored it. He had a history of pushing through discomfort. Pain meant nothing when deals were on the line. He made it halfway down the main path before everything changed. The world suddenly tilted, his vision blurred, and a wave of nausea swept over him. He stopped walking and gripped the metal railing beside the path, trying to steady himself. His heart began to pound erratically, as though something inside him had snapped out of rhythm. The pain in his chest intensified. He gasped once, tried to take a step forward, but his legs gave out underneath him. The ground rushed up fast and hard, and then there was only silence. His body hit the pavement with a dull thud, sprawled across the walkway like a man who had simply fallen asleep on the job. But this was no nap. He wasn't moving. His breaths had gone shallow and irregular, and his face was pale, almost bluish. People nearby didn't notice at first. A couple walked past, absorbed in conversation. A teenager on a bike sped by without looking. Time moved normally for everyone except Michael, who lay quietly between life and death under the morning sun. And that was the exact moment when two small figures appeared on the path, holding hands. Lily and Emma, 5-year-old identical twins with curly blonde hair and big blue eyes, were walking through the park on their way to the hospital. Dressed in white summer dresses that fluttered with every step, they looked like they had stepped out of a children's storybook. But they were not on some fairy tale stroll. They had been at the playground earlier, trying to distract themselves from the reason they walked this path so often. Their mother had been in a coma for a month, and every few days their grandmother brought them to visit her in the hospital just a few blocks away. That day they were walking on their own. Their grandmother had grown tired and trusted them to make the familiar route alone. Lily was the first to see the man lying on the ground. She tugged Emma's arm and pointed. "He's not moving," she said, her voice thin with concern. The girls stepped closer, unsure whether they should be scared or helpful. Michael didn't look dangerous, just very still. His eyes were closed and his face didn't move. "Is he not breathing?" Lily whispered. Emma knelt down beside him. She had seen someone faint once, and she remembered what to do. "I think we need to call someone," she said with determination. Reaching into her tiny backpack, she pulled out a pink toy-like phone, a real one, programmed by their grandmother with just a few emergency contacts. She pressed the big green button marked help and waited for someone to pick up. When the 911 operator answered, Emma's voice was clear and steady. She told them they were in the park near the fountain, that a man had fallen and wasn't waking up. She gave their names and said they were walking to the hospital. Her words were simple, but they were enough. The operator sent an ambulance immediately. Emma held Lily's hand tightly as they stood near Michael, watching over him the way a child watches a hurt bird. Within minutes, sirens approached in the distance. 2 paramedics rushed down the path with equipment, one of them already assessing Michael's vitals as the other began CPR. A third voice radioed in updates. The girls stepped back but didn't leave. One of the paramedics turned to them briefly. "Did you call this in?" Emma nodded. He smiled. "You probably just saved his life." They didn't smile back. They just watched as the man they didn't know, the man in the beautiful suit with the quiet face, was lifted onto a stretcher and wheeled away. Then Lily took Emma's hand again, and they continued walking to the hospital like they had always planned. They had no idea that the man they had just saved wasn't just anyone. He was Michael Rivers, a billionaire, a CEO, a man who had never been rescued by anyone in his entire life until now. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines and the rhythmic sound of a heart monitor. Michael Rivers slowly opened his eyes to a blur of white ceiling tiles and fluorescent lights. For a few seconds, he had no idea where he was or how he got there. His head was heavy, his chest sore, and his throat dry. He blinked slowly, trying to steady his focus. A nurse noticed the movement and walked over to his bedside, gently placing a hand on his arm and speaking in a calm voice. "You're awake," she said softly, smiling. "You gave us all quite a scare." Michael tried to speak, but his voice came out and barely audible. "What happened?" "You collapsed in the park," she explained. "Heart arrhythmia, most likely triggered by stress or an underlying condition. But you're very lucky." Someone called 911 almost immediately. The ambulance was there within minutes. If they hadn't called when they did, you probably wouldn't have made it. He frowned, the memory distant and unclear. "Who called?" The nurse hesitated, then gave him a curious look. "Two little girls. 5 years old, from what we were told. They saw you collapse, and one of them called emergency services using a phone their grandmother gave them. They even stayed with you until the paramedics arrived." Michael blinked in disbelief. "Little girls?" "Yes." The nurse nodded. Apparently, they were on their way to visit their mother. "Here at the hospital. She's in a coma." The girls didn't even wait around for attention. They just went on their way. "Remarkable, really." He leaned back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling, absorbing the weight of that information. The thought of two small children noticing him, recognizing the danger, and stepping up in such a critical moment, it was almost surreal. In his world, everything was calculated. Success was measured by outcomes driven by logic, not emotion. Yet, here he was alive because of the quiet courage of two kids he had never met. By the next morning, Michael's condition had stabilized enough that he was allowed visitors. His assistant came in with flowers and documents, already talking about rescheduling meetings and shifting appointments, but Michael stopped him. "Find out who those girls are," he said quietly. "I want to meet them." Later that day, a young doctor handed him a copy of the emergency report. There, scribbled in the paramedics' notes, were the names Lily and Emma Hart. They had given their grandmother's phone number during the 911 call. That was enough. Michael didn't wait. He asked a hospital volunteer to help him find their mother's room and then insisted on walking there himself despite protests from his nurse. The walk was slow. His legs were still weak and he leaned slightly on the railings along the corridor. But something was pulling him forward. A need to see for himself who these girls were. To look them in the eyes and say thank you. Not out of obligation, but from something deeper that he couldn't yet explain. When he reached the small, shared pediatric waiting area, he spotted them immediately. Two little girls sitting on a bench side by side, identical in every way. Curly blonde hair, blue eyes, white dresses slightly rumpled from the long day. One of them was reading a worn picture book while the other was quietly swinging her legs. They looked up as he approached, their faces curious but not frightened. Michael stopped a few feet away, uncertain how to begin. "Are you Lily and Emma?" he asked gently. The girls exchanged a glance, then nodded in unison. He smiled, something soft and unfamiliar in his expression. "I think you saved my life." Lily's eyes widened a little. You were the man in the park. Michael nodded. I was, and I'm very lucky you were there. Emma stood up, her voice calm and matter of fact. I called the ambulance. I knew the number. I know. He said you were very brave, both of you. The girls looked at each other again. There was no pride in their expressions, no seeking of praise. They had done what needed to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. That quiet strength shook something loose inside Michael. These weren't just kids. They were survivors. Small, strong, and carrying far more than they should at their age. Can I sit with you for a minute? He asked. They nodded. He lowered himself carefully onto the bench beside them, wincing slightly from the effort. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lily pointed across the hall toward a quiet room with the blinds drawn. That's where our mom is. She doesn't wake up. Michael looked at the room, then back at her. I'm sorry. That must be really hard. Emma shrugged lightly, though her eyes betrayed the weight behind the motion. We come to visit her. Grandma says she might wake up if we keep talking to her. He nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. These children had been carrying heartbreak on their backs like school bags, and yet they'd found the strength to save a stranger in the middle of it all. Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card. This is my number, he said. If you or your grandma ever need anything, you can call me. Emma took the card carefully. Are you a doctor? He smiled. No, I build buildings, big ones, but I'd like to help however I can. The girls seemed unsure what to say. So, he stood up slowly, thanked them again, and turned to leave. As he walked back to his room, the hospital hall seemed different, less sterile, more human. He couldn't stop thinking about those girls, about how easily the world could have lost him that day. And about how, despite all his money, power, and planning, it had been two small children who brought him back. And without knowing it, they'd started something that would change all their lives. The next few days passed slowly for Michael as he remained in the hospital under careful observation. Though he was recovering physically, something inside him refused to settle. Every time he closed his eyes, he didn't see the meetings he was missing or the boardroom chaos that might await him. Instead, he saw two tiny hands, a pink toy phone, two pairs of solemn blue eyes. His thoughts kept returning to Lily and Emma, two 5-year-old girls who should have been thinking about toys or bedtime stories, but instead had grown used to hospital hallways, nurses' shoes, and the sound of machines beeping beside their mother's bed. Michael had experienced control in every form. He'd built skyscrapers, turned bankrupt properties into empires, and negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking. But nothing in his life had prepared him for what he was feeling now. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something more persistent, something unshakable. These girls had walked into his life by chance, but the weight of what they carried, and the way they had acted without hesitation unsettled him in the most unexpected way. They had seen a man fall and didn't freeze. They didn't run away. They helped because to them helping was just what you do. Even if you're 5, even if your world is already falling apart, unable to ignore the pull, Michael asked his assistant to dig deeper. Discreetly, of course, what he found only made things worse. The girl's mother, Claire Hart, had been in a coma since a car accident nearly 6 weeks ago. Their father had vanished from their lives years earlier, and their sole guardian now was their maternal grandmother, an elderly woman in her late 70s who was struggling to cover both medical expenses and the needs of two energetic little girls. They lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment across town, and the hospital was a 30-minute walk away. That meant the girls had walked all the way to the hospital by themselves the day they found him. Not out of adventure, out of necessity. Michael sat alone in his hospital bed for a long time after reading the report. Something inside him cracked open further. He thought of himself at 5 years old. The son of a real estate tycoon, carted around by drivers and tutors, never once worrying about a parent in the hospital or how he would get there. His world had been clean, structured, and in many ways detached from reality. He had grown up learning how to win, how to dominate, how to survive in boardrooms. But he had never learned how to live with uncertainty or pain, or the kind of invisible weight that children like Lily and Emma carried every single day. He couldn't stop thinking about how small they had looked on that hospital bench with their feet swinging above the floor and their eyes far too knowing for their age. He remembered the way Emma had said she might wake up if we keep talking to her. As if hope were something that had to be tended like a candle in the wind. By the time Michael was discharged from the hospital, he knew he couldn't go back to normal, not the way he had defined it before. The office had sent a car to pick him up, but he asked the driver to take him somewhere else first. He told no one. He didn't bring flowers or gifts this time. He just returned to the hospital and asked for Claire Hart's room again. When he arrived, the girls were there sitting on either side of the bed. Claire lay motionless, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow but steady. Lily was brushing her mother's hair gently with a small plastic comb while Emma sat quietly whispering a story about a bird that got lost in a storm but found its way back home. The moment they saw Michael, they lit up. Not with the excitement children reserve for celebrities, but with the kind of calm recognition that made it feel like he belonged there. He asked if he could sit. They nodded. No one asked him why he came back, and he didn't offer a reason. He didn't need to. The nurse came in briefly, checked Claire's monitors, and smiled softly at the girls. "She's stable," she said, directing a glance at Michael. "But no real change yet." He nodded but said nothing. After a few minutes of silence, he turned to Lily. "Do you ever get scared?" She didn't look up right away. Then she said, "Sometimes, but Emma tells me it's okay to be scared as long as we keep going." Emma nodded solemnly. "Grandma says we're strong girls, so we try to be." Michael sat back watching them. There were no tears, no tantrums, just this quiet resilience that wrapped itself around them like armor. And he realized something then. These girls didn't need saving. They weren't victims. They were warriors in dresses. But they did need help. They needed someone to step into the space between strength and survival to lift just enough of the weight so they could breathe. He returned every day after that. Sometimes he brought coloring books. Sometimes he simply sat beside them. He spoke softly to Claire, even though she never responded. He read stories aloud, ones the girls picked. They took turns holding the book with him like it was something sacred. And in that small room, with a hospital blanket pulled over Claire's legs and the sound of two girls humming under their breath, Michael Rivers began to feel more human than he ever had in his entire life. He didn't know what this was becoming. But for the first time in a long, long time, he didn't need to know. The rain had started to fall just as Michael stepped out of the hospital later that week, but he barely noticed. His mind was full, the kind of full that made time feel slower, stretched out by thoughts he couldn't shake. For the past several days, he had been visiting Claire's room regularly, always greeted by Lily and Emma, who now treated his presence as something expected rather than strange. The staff had stopped asking questions, simply nodding at him as he walked in each day with a coffee in one hand and a small offering for the girls in the other. Nothing extravagant, just things that made their time in the hospital a little easier. Storybooks, stickers, puzzles. He didn't do it to impress them. He did it because it felt right. It felt real. He had learned more about Claire Hart in a week than he had about most of the executives on his board in a year. She had worked as a nurse in a local clinic before the accident, known for her patience, her calm presence, her ability to make people feel heard. She had raised the girls alone after their father left and had never once complained. She'd taken double shifts to cover rent and still managed to make dinner every night. Michael read all this in her personnel files, gathered discreetly by his assistant. But it wasn't just the words that stayed with him. It was the image of those two little girls holding her hand day after day, not losing faith, not asking for sympathy. That evening, he sat in his penthouse, surrounded by sleek furniture, walls of glass, and silence so deep it almost had a weight. The city lights blinked below, but he didn't look at them. He sat at his desk, staring at the blank page in front of him, wondering how it was possible that two 5-year-olds had managed to crash through every defense he had spent decades building. He could still hear Lily's tiny voice asking, "Do you think she knows we're here?" and Emma's calm certainty when she'd answered, "Of course she does. She knows everything." There was something about that moment, so innocent, so sure, that had shaken him. The next morning, he arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. The girls weren't there yet, and Claire's room was quiet. Michael sat down beside her bed and looked at her face, wondering what kind of strength it took to live the life she had. Her cheeks were pale, her breathing shallow, but her expression was peaceful. He began speaking softly, not because he expected her to hear, but because he needed to say the words out loud. "You raised two extraordinary girls," he said. "And they don't even know it. They just think this is normal, being this brave, carrying this much. They think that's just how it works." He paused, watching her chest rise and fall. "They saved my life. They didn't even hesitate. And I think I owe you something for that. Not just gratitude, more than that. I don't know what yet, but I'm not walking away." That same day, Michael took action the only way he knew how, by using the power he had spent his life building. He didn't announce it, didn't post about it. He simply made a call to one of the best neurologists in the country, arranged for a second evaluation of Claire's condition, and offered to fund any advanced treatments available. Within 24 hours, Claire was transferred to a private room with upgraded equipment, specialized monitoring, and a new team of doctors. The girls were too young to understand all the changes, but their grandmother noticed. She approached Michael one afternoon in the hallway, her voice trembling with both exhaustion and gratitude. "I don't know why you're doing this," she said quietly. "But thank you. They needed someone." Michael looked her in the eyes and answered with something that surprised even him. "So did I." That night, as he watched the girls color quietly at the foot of their mother's bed, something inside him settled. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or deadlines or press statements. He was thinking about what it meant to matter. Not in headlines or balance sheets, but in someone's real life. In a room where nothing was expected of him except presence and patience. He didn't fully understand yet where this was going. All he knew was that he wasn't done showing up. Not for Claire. Not for Lily and Emma. And not for the part of himself that was finally beginning to wake up. Claire's medical progress was slow, but there were signs, small ones, that gave everyone hope. She was still in a coma, but her reflexes were beginning to respond to light and sound. Her breathing grew stronger, more regular. The doctors didn't make promises, but Michael noticed how their updates became slightly more optimistic each day. Still, it was Lily and Emma who carried the most hope in the room. They never stopped talking to her, never stopped holding her hand or brushing her hair or showing her their drawings. It wasn't just routine. It was ritual, an unspoken belief that their presence, their voices, their stories could keep their mother connected to the world. Michael watched all of this unfold with a quiet awe. He had never known children who loved so fiercely and so gently at the same time. He had also never been around children for more than a few minutes at a time in his entire adult life. And now here he was spending hours in a hospital room with two girls who in many ways had already become part of his world. He began learning their rhythms. Lily liked to sing softly to herself when she was coloring. Emma liked to collect facts about birds, weather, hospital machines, and recite them like little spells. They both had favorite colors, favorite snacks, favorite jokes, and dreams about one day becoming pilots so they could fly their mother to see the clouds up close. But for all their strength, Michael started to notice the cracks. Lily began to get headaches from lack of sleep. Emma's voice grew quieter in the evenings. Their clothes, though always clean, were clearly worn. Their grandmother tried her best, but it was obvious she was overwhelmed. She shuffled through the hallways slowly, her hands slightly trembling, her face pale with fatigue. Michael offered help, small things at first, rides, meals, errands. She always thanked him, always hesitated, but never said no. It was becoming clear that without intervention, the family would soon be pushed beyond its limits. One evening, after the girls had fallen asleep in chairs pulled close to their mother's bed, Michael stepped out into the hallway and made a call. Not to a doctor, not to a lawyer. This time, he called his own therapist, someone he hadn't spoken to in almost a year. He didn't talk about business or stress or burnout. He talked about two little girls who had made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Responsibility that wasn't about profit, but about care. He talked about feeling like an outsider who wanted to stay. About realizing that everything he'd built in his career suddenly felt hollow next to the sound of Emma laughing or Lily leaning her head on his shoulder while she talked about the stars. The conversation didn't solve anything, but it helped him admit something to himself. He didn't just care about these girls. He needed them, too. In saving his life, they had shaken something loose, and now that part of him couldn't go back to pretending it didn't exist. That night, he went home and sat down at his long, untouched dining table and made a decision. Not an impulsive one, but one that had been building since the moment he opened his eyes in the ICU. The next day, he met with a legal advisor. He asked what it would take to establish a guardianship arrangement if it ever became necessary. He didn't intend to take the girls away from their grandmother, but he wanted to ensure that no matter what happened to Claire, the girls would be protected, safe. He started a trust fund in their names, ensuring they'd have access to medical care, education, and anything else they needed without anyone ever having to ask. He didn't tell Lily and Emma about any of this. Not yet. For them, the world was still measured in storybooks and coloring pages and soft hospital blankets. They didn't need the weight of legal terms or financial safety nets. They just needed someone to keep showing up. And Michael did every day. One afternoon, Emma climbed into the chair next to him and looked at him with a serious expression. "Are you rich?" she asked. Michael laughed softly. "I suppose so. Why do you ask?" She shrugged. "You wear fancy shoes and your car has buttons everywhere." Lily leaned over from across the room, "But you don't act rich. Rich people on TV are mean." Michael smiled. "Well, maybe TV gets it wrong." Emma tilted her head. "Are you going to go away when Mommy wakes up?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He looked into her clear blue eyes and shook his head. "Not if you don't want me to." She didn't say anything. Just nodded and leaned her head against his arm. In that moment, Michael knew the truth had changed. He was no longer visiting the hospital out of guilt or debt or even admiration. He was there because he belonged there. Because those girls had pulled him out of a kind of loneliness he hadn't even realized he was drowning in. And because he wasn't going to let them walk this road alone. Not now. Not ever. Michael's days began to revolve around the hospital in a way he had never anticipated. The office still ran. The business still moved forward. But his presence there became secondary. A shadow of the man he once was in the corporate world. Meetings were attended by deputies. Emails went unanswered for longer than usual. His staff grew quiet, confused, curious. But Michael didn't offer explanations. He wasn't hiding, just shifting away from the sterile glass towers and back into something far more grounded. For the first time in years, he wasn't calculating return on investment or market growth. He was thinking about Claire's heartbeat, Lily's tired eyes, Emma's endless questions, and what he could do to keep them all from falling apart. Claire's condition was improving in ways too subtle for outsiders to notice. Her fingers twitched when the girls touched her. Her breathing was less assisted. The neurologists were cautiously optimistic. No one said the word miracle, but the tone in their voices softened each day. Lily and Emma never missed a visit. They carried hope like a shared secret, like it was their job to believe when no one else could. And Michael, who used to put his faith only in logic and contracts, found himself joining their quiet belief without even realizing it. One morning, Michael arrived to find the girls waiting in the hallway with small paper bags in their hands. They had drawn stars and flowers on the outside, and inside were two slightly smushed blueberry muffins. They had asked the hospital cafeteria lady to help them make a breakfast for Mr. Michael. It was the first time he felt his throat tighten in public. He sat down on the bench between them, took a bite of the muffin, and told them it was the best thing he'd tasted in months. Lily giggled. Emma leaned her head on his shoulder. It was so simple, so small, and yet it felt like something sacred. But outside the warm circle of hospital visits and story time, there were realities to face. The girl's grandmother was growing weaker. Her blood pressure had been unstable, and the physical strain of caring for the girls, managing household chores, and walking back and forth from the hospital was taking its toll. Michael noticed the way she rubbed her back constantly, the way her hands trembled when she signed visitor logs. One day, after walking her out to the curb and watching her struggle to unlock her car door, he made a decision. Without consulting her, he arranged for a private caregiver to visit her home each day. A kind woman named Mara began helping with groceries, cleaning, and small tasks. The grandmother resisted at first, but eventually relented. She was too tired to fight off kindness. Michael didn't stop there. He hired a tutor to come twice a week to keep Lily and Emma engaged with schoolwork while they were away from class. He installed a line of credit at a local pharmacy so the family wouldn't have to worry about medicine or supplies. It wasn't about money to him anymore. It was about building a safety net under people who had never had one. Yet the most unexpected part of this chapter in his life wasn't what he gave, but what he received. He began to laugh more. Real laughter, not polite corporate chuckles. He found himself talking less about forecasts and more about bedtime routines and which stories made the girls fall asleep fastest. His assistant noticed the change. His board noticed it, too. But none of them questioned it because Michael, who had once been known for being cold and unreachable, now carried something in his face that hadn't been there before. A softness, a depth. One afternoon, as they sat together in Claire's room, Emma suddenly asked, "Did you always want to be rich?" Michael thought about it. "I think I always wanted to be important," he said. "But I used to think being rich was the same thing." Emma frowned. "Is it not?" He smiled. "Not anymore." Later that same day, as Lily and Emma took turns reading to their mother, Claire's eyelids fluttered just for a second. Then again, the girls didn't see it, but Michael did. His heart leapt. He stood up and called for the nurse, who confirmed what he'd seen. There was brain activity. A reaction, a step forward. It wasn't full consciousness, but it was something. Michael sat beside Claire long after the girls had left with their grandmother. He took her hand and spoke softly. "They're waiting for you." They never stopped. "I've never seen love like that, Claire. You gave them that. And they gave me something I didn't know I was missing." He didn't expect a response, but somewhere in his chest, he started to believe that she heard every word. The morning Claire opened her eyes began like any other. The hospital hallway buzzed with the usual shuffle of carts and distant conversations. Michael had arrived earlier than usual, stopping by the cafe downstairs to bring hot chocolate for Lily and Emma. He carried the paper cups carefully, the familiar aroma of cocoa blending with hospital disinfectant as he stepped into the pediatric wing. But before he reached the girls, a nurse met him near the door, her expression unreadable at first and then slowly shifting into something warm and incredulous. She placed a hand gently on his arm and said, "She's awake." For a moment, he didn't speak. The words hung in the air as if his brain couldn't quite grasp them. "Claire," he asked quietly just to be sure he'd heard right. The nurse nodded. "She opened her eyes about 30 minutes ago. She can't speak yet, but she's responsive. She's blinking to questions. Squeezed my hand when I asked if she knew her daughter's names. Michael stood frozen. Something swelled in his chest so abruptly he had to take a breath just to steady himself. He handed the drinks to the nurse and walked quickly toward the room, his heart racing faster with each step. Inside, Claire lay in bed, pale but present. Her eyes were open, and though her face was still, her gaze was alert. It held depth, memory, recognition. Michael approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. She turned her head weakly in his direction and blinked once. He sat down beside her, his voice shaking with a mixture of relief and awe. "Hi, Claire," he said softly. "You've got two girls who never gave up on you." Not for 1 second. A tear slipped down her cheek. She tried to speak, but her throat caught. Michael reached for her hand and took it gently. "Don't try yet. Just rest. You're safe. They're okay. They're amazing." He stayed with her until the girls arrived. They ran down the hall laughing as they often did, not knowing what waited just beyond the door. When they stepped into the room and saw their mother looking at them, their laughter stopped in midair. Lily dropped the stuffed animal in her hands. Emma froze. Claire blinked again, slower this time, and the girls rushed forward, throwing their arms around her carefully, afraid to hurt her, but unable to stop themselves. Lily was crying. Emma's voice cracked as she whispered, "You came back." Claire's fingers trembled as they brushed through their curls. It was a fragile reunion, but a real one. The medical team confirmed the miracle they had all hoped for. Claire's progress over the coming weeks would be slow. She'd need physical therapy, speech recovery, and long-term care. But the fact that she had woken up at all was extraordinary. Every nurse who had seen the case said the same thing. This shouldn't have been possible. Not this quickly. Not after that long. But no one questioned it. Love had done what science couldn't measure. Michael became a fixture in her recovery just as he had in the girls' lives. He spoke with doctors, arranged for private in-home care, even started redesigning his second property to accommodate a long-term family residence. His penthouse had never felt like home. But this new place, a sun-filled house near the edge of a quiet park, already seemed to carry something softer, something warmer. One afternoon, as Claire practiced speech exercises with a therapist, Michael sat with the girls outside on a bench. They were eating ice cream, the sun painting soft golden light across their faces. Lily looked up at him suddenly and asked, "Are you going to leave now that Mommy's better?" The question struck him with more force than he expected. He shook his head immediately. "No, I'm not going anywhere." Emma wiped her mouth and said, "Even if she doesn't remember you." "She will," he said quietly. "But even if she didn't, I'd still stay." A few days later, Claire was strong enough to sit in a wheelchair and go outside. Michael pushed her down a quiet path in the hospital garden while the girls ran ahead, weaving between trees and laughing with the kind of freedom only children know. Claire looked at him, her voice still raspy, but her words deliberate. "You've done more than I can ever repay." He shook his head. "You gave me something I didn't know I needed. I think we're even." She smiled weakly but sincerely. "They love you." He looked ahead at the girls who had stopped to pick dandelions. "I love them, too." Claire reached over and touched his arm. Her fingers light. "You know they saved you, but I think you saved them back." That night, after the girls were asleep and Claire was resting, Michael stayed behind in the hospital garden. The sky was deep blue, stars blinking quietly into place. He leaned back on the bench, hands folded in his lap, and let the silence settle around him. This life wasn't what he had planned. There was no PowerPoint, no quarterly forecast, no exit strategy. But it was his. Every piece of it had been earned not by strategy, but by staying, by showing up, by refusing to walk away. He looked up at the sky, then closed his eyes and whispered something he hadn't said in years. Not in boardrooms, not in interviews, but here under a quiet sky. "Thank you. Months passed and the rhythm of their new life slowly settled into something close to normal. Claire continued to heal, her strength returning in steady waves. There were days when she struggled to sit up on her own, when words came slowly or her balance wavered during therapy, but she faced each setback with the same quiet determination that had shaped her daughters. The girls, no longer bound to hospital routines, returned to school with bright backpacks and even brighter eyes, always carrying the invisible resilience built during those long days at their mother's bedside. Michael remained a constant through all of it, not because he had to, but because leaving never even occurred to him. He had found something among them that he never found in boardrooms or luxury suites or gala dinners, a reason to stay. He spent more time with the girls than with anyone in his professional world. He learned how to braid curly blonde hair on rushed school mornings. Even if his fingers fumbled clumsily at first. He helped Emma build birdhouses in the garage and patiently sat through Lily's endless puppet shows that usually turned into dramatic retellings of fairy tales mixed with hospital memories. When Claire was strong enough to walk around the garden by herself, she would watch them from the porch, eyes shining with the kind of gratitude that doesn't need words. She had come back from the edge of death to find her family still whole and unexpectedly larger than before. One evening, Michael invited them all to dinner at the house he had once bought as a quiet escape for himself, a place he imagined using only once or twice a year. Now it felt lived in, filled with sounds of laughter, the scent of baking cookies, the occasional trail of toys across the hallway. Claire wore a soft blue dress and walked slowly but proudly into the dining room with her daughters holding her hands on either side. The table was set beautifully, and a private chef, who had grown fond of the girls over time, prepared everything to their taste. Lily insisted on saying grace even though no one in the room was particularly religious. But everyone closed their eyes and listened as she thanked the universe for moms who wake up, for men who don't leave, and for cookies that don't burn in the oven. After dinner, as the girls played with flashlights under a blanket fort in the living room, Michael and Claire sat on the back patio. The sun had set and the air was warm, the kind of evening that lingers in memory long after it's over. Claire turned to him slowly, her voice still carrying the fragility of someone recovering, but her gaze was steady. "Why did you stay?" she asked. "Really?" He didn't answer right away. He watched the stars above them scattered like breadcrumbs across the night. Then he turned to her and said, "Because I didn't want to keep building a life that only looked good from the outside. I didn't realize how empty everything else had become until your daughters reminded me what it means to be needed. Not for my money or my name, but just as me." Claire nodded thoughtfully. They needed someone. But they didn't need saving. That's the thing about them. They don't know how remarkable they are. They just keep going. "They remind me of someone else I know," he replied. They sat in silence again, letting the stillness say what words couldn't. Inside, the girls had fallen asleep in their fort, two soft bodies tangled in blankets and dreams. Michael carried them one by one to the guest room, tucking them in with the care of someone who had memorized the way they each liked their pillows. Claire watched from the doorway, leaning on her cane, a quiet smile on her face. The following weekend, the four of them visited the park where everything had started. Claire walked slowly, her steps uncertain but determined while Michael held her arm to steady her. The girls ran ahead, shrieking with laughter, racing toward the fountain. When they reached the exact spot where they had found Michael lying months ago, Emma turned around and said, "This is where it all changed, right?" Michael nodded. "Yes, right here." Lily stood beside her sister, hands on her hips like a little general. "You looked like a sleeping giant." Michael laughed. "I felt like one, too." Claire took a slow breath, standing quietly on the edge of the path. And somehow two tiny girls woke him up. He looked at her, his eyes soft. "They didn't just wake me up. They saved me." That night, back at the house, Michael walked past the guest room and saw the girls fast asleep again. Their faces were peaceful, framed by the same golden curls he had seen that day in the park. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before turning away. In the months to come, there would be challenges. Recovery would continue. Claire would face good days and bad. The girls would grow, ask harder questions, learn new truths. But one thing was now certain. They would face it all together. The kind of togetherness not born of obligation, but of choice. Of love found in the most unexpected of places. When one man fell and two children refused to walk past, Michael no longer needed skyscrapers to feel tall. He had found something stronger than success. He had found family. In my view, the ending of this story carries a rare and powerful kind of beauty, one that doesn't rely on dramatic twists or grand gestures, but on quiet transformation and emotional truth. It's not just a tale of a man being saved physically. It's about a soul being slowly rebuilt through connection, vulnerability, and unexpected love. Michael begins as a man defined by success and solitude, yet ends as someone who discovers the deeper meaning of presence, family, and purpose. That journey is deeply human and profoundly hopeful. What I find most moving is that the story never makes the children seem like symbols or tools for his growth. Lily and Emma are real in every sense. Small, brave, joyful, and scarred, but never broken. They don't ask for much yet they give everything. And in return, Michael doesn't just help them, he lets himself be changed by them. That kind of emotional reciprocity, especially across generations and social divides, is rare in fiction and even rarer in life. This isn't a fairy tale with a perfect bow tied on top. It's better than that. It's about messy healing, quiet loyalty, and the surprising places where redemption can begin. The fact that it all starts with a fall in the park and ends with a shared life is a reminder. Sometimes the most ordinary moments hide the beginnings of everything extraordinary.